this morning, who all was here for this morning talks with Michael and Peter? They were fabulous. I mean, at least from my standpoint, they were. And I sat halfway through Peter's story, and I was like, oh my God, he's totally taking the wind out of my sails. Because I felt like so much of what he was talking about was exactly what not exactly, but so similar to some of the stories and slides that I was going to tell. So in a way, I think what I'm about to talk about here might be just a little bit of a deeper dive into some of the concepts that they kind of talked about at a high level. So in a way, I think that's pretty exciting to see the industry is evolving and growing at this point in scale. So as Heidi mentioned, I don't know if I look it, but I've been doing this for about 20 years. Actually 20 years as of this year. So I'm like, woo, kind of a milestone for me. And it's been an interesting journey along those ways. And I guess the one caveat that I want to start off with is that the majority of my experience does come from a consulting standpoint, which is different than being in-house. And Peter touched on that a little bit just this last hour, with his time and work at Adaptive Path to the transition of going in-house. And although it's the same job title or the same task that we're trying to do, there is a different slant to it. And so I want to be aware of that. And although my story comes with that consulting angle, what I'd like to do is leave some time at the end to talk about this stuff a little bit more and understand, maybe anyone else's experience. So before I get going too far, though, I would like to get an understanding of who all is in the room. So UX designers as consultants, I know there's a couple just because you're my coworkers. What about in-house enterprise developers? Or designers, designers. Whoa, welcome. Thank you for coming. And developers, do we have any? Excellent, thank you for coming. And product managers. You guys just got a little bum rap the last hour, sorry. I won't continue that. Cool, so as I said, I'm excited to take on this topic today. It's near and dear to my heart, and it wasn't until just a couple of years ago that I finally accepted being a designer for the enterprise applications. I spent many years in my career trying to do consumer stuff, not doing it very well, because I always had this other slant of like practicality. And in these last couple of years, I've realized that that's just okay. So just a little bit of a history lesson. So in 1999, I got to work on that. It's fuzzy because resolutions back then weren't very good. It's an application called Talisma. It was a CRM tool built in kind of 97, 98, 99, 2000. They continued on, competed with Pivotal, and then now Microsoft Dynamics has kind of blown up as an industry. And I should caveat when I say I got to work on that, I got to work on those little 8x8 icons across the top. There was plenty of other stuff that I would have loved to take on, but at that time, it was pretty tough to be a designer. I was a graphic web designer was my title. And trying to get in and say, oh, there's a better way to solve this problem to a bunch of developers and product managers, they were just kind of like, can you make that new icon there? So I guess it was a win, meaning that we moved from clip art to custom-made icons that I poured my heart and soul into, pixel by pixel. And then there was this other time in 2005 where I worked on another CRM tool. This time it was called Market Leader. Say Market Leader on there? Yeah. For Market Leader. And this was a CRM tool for real estate agents to use to manage their leads, their lead funnel, their client base, drip campaigns, all of that stuff. And we wanted to take that to the mobile experience. And so we built it for the BlackBerry, of course, before the iPhone came out. And then in 2014, this is a employee collaboration tool and system for BAE Systems, trying to connect 250,000 employees across the globe into a cohesive system so that they could chat with each other. And it's been pretty exciting to watch this journey unfold. There's been lots of other stuff in between then and since then. And I think what's exciting for me is that design finally has a seat at that table. That in 1999, there was no seat for a designer at that table. Today, it's starting there. And that doesn't mean that everything is starting there, but I think more often than not, it is. So this brings us to the concept of UX in the enterprise. Do you know anybody, have you ever left a job because of the tools or the systems that you had to use for them? I can think back to my days in, before all of this, when I was, shift manager for Pizza Hut. Awesome. And we had a point of purchase display, right? It was touch screen, and we had to do inventory management on that. It was horrible. It took hours to try and input some shipment where you could have just marked it off on a piece of paper. It was this idea of I want to move to digital, but in a way you've made it worse by going digital, right? And I think as we look at these tools and things that we're creating today, we need to understand that these are tools that people are working in, every day, all week, and that's different. That's different than, say, my time at a restaurant review app, where people were coming into it for 30 seconds, and we were okay with that. And so, in a way, I find this really exciting because we are making real change for people, and we can actually make people's lives considerably better. That at the end of an 8-hour day, the tools that they're using are not hindering their job or hindering their happiness. So at the base of this conversation is the user, and yet the concept of enterprise software is defined as something vastly different. So this is the Wikipedia definition. The needs of an organization outweigh those of the users. I personally take issue with this, and is part of why I'm here today talking about this. So I want to create a quick little baseline. I don't want to spend too much time on this. We've already lost enough time. And talk about some apps and maybe where they fall on a continuum. So I'm just going to kind of go through this pretty quick. I'm going to get them all up here. It was a really nice set of animations, I know. But on the top right, we have SharePoint and Coupa. For the purpose of this conversation, I put Asher up there as well, as being complex tools that employees use. These are not things that you would ever take home and be like, yo, kids, check this out, right? It's just not going to happen. And then on the bottom left there is New York Times, right? Super simple, well done app. I'm just consuming some news. I love the conversations about Slack that are happening because it's absolutely an employee tool. It was made, for employees to communicate better. Then they said, oh my God, that's better than the game we were creating. Let's make it a product. But in the same sense, I've also read articles of people using that to keep their families connected, which is crazy. I'm like, oh, it's going backwards. It usually goes the other way. Things like Facebook and LinkedIn, I tried to put, we could argue all day about where these all actually fit on this scale, but Facebook is moving towards the employee as well. They've threatened for years that they have a business version of Facebook, right? That you could use it like Slack or like Teams for Microsoft, things like that. So these are all the different types of tools. And so for the purpose of today, though, I kind of want to focus on this upper area, where these are employee tools made by employees, this is another great one, but this idea across the bottom that these are big tools made by big companies for employees. In the case of SharePoint, not only is it a tool created by an enterprise for enterprises, but those enterprises then build upon it as a platform. And that's definitely near and dear to my heart. I spent 7-8 years consulting in this SharePoint space. Enterprise apps go by many names: mission critical systems, line of business applications, back office tools. And I'm sure there's probably a dozen more. These are applications and software being used by employees inside large organizations. It's used solely for business. and created by an enterprise for use by professionals at any scale. And so just going back, I did include, oh man, I'm not even going to go back. Damn it, I did go back. Things like Photoshop, those are absolutely, enterprise tools, but they are used for personal use as well. So as I'm learning a tool, as from a user standpoint, so I want to think about this, trying to add some sentiment, some ideas from that user pain. Anytime I have to use a new tool, and that could be a new employee coming into an organization, it could be a new product or application being rolled out. I'll talk a little bit more about some other projects, but we're working on a huge loan processing application. It's going to completely upend a financial services company. And although a lot of their employees are a part of the process, it's still going to be a huge learning period when they go to roll out that application. So we need to be really aware of that from the onset. But when you start off on any given journey of an application, it can really go one of two ways. One is things go well, and I generally move up the chart as experience goes along. And sorry, I used emojis in all of this. They're easy. To the point where I've had a pretty positive experience and I enjoy the application. And of course, it can go the other way, where I maybe trudge along until after some period of time, I've learned enough about it, although I don't love it, that I can at least tolerate it. Right? And we all know that this happens. And then there's the version where it just straight up bombs and everybody abandons ship. So this creates two types of users from my standpoint. One is the advocates, and these are the people that love it, shout it from the mountaintops, and herald it as the greatest thing since sliced bread. And in many ways, these are the applications that come up through the employee process. Things like how Dropbox infiltrated the enterprise, how Slack infiltrated the enterprise. These are things that people enjoyed using. They saw the momentum around it, and then they started pushing it in. On the other end of the spectrum are haters. Haters going to hate. They're going to be there. The sad thing is they're just as vocal. Right? So people are still going to hear it, if not hear it louder, and that's a problem. Right? That's a real problem. These are the people that, if they're having to use these tools day in and day out, back to that whole 8 hours a day, 7 days a week, 5 days a week, sorry. They're the ones that are going to leave their job. And retention is definitely a big issue. So just like your typical survey, anything below that 80% mark is room for improvement. This is where we should be focusing. So as we look at, say, journeys and customer journeys and things like that, this is where we can really focus our energy. And so this goes back to, these are tools being used every single day. So I have kind of 3 areas that I want to focus on for the remainder of this presentation. And but first, I want to tell a story. That's what I said I would do. I had some stories from the front lines. Got lots of them. So this is a little project that I did. So 5 years ago, as I said, I was working in consulting for SharePoint. I'd gotten an email in through our website. It's kind of that 1%. Your website actually generates business for you while you're sleeping. The VP of Workplace Innovation at American Express was looking for a 10-year vision for employee collaboration. And so I got that, when I got to work in the morning. He sent it at some ungodly hour in the middle of the night. And I was insanely excited. I was just like, oh my God, this is it. It's finally come. I've put my time in. I've done all this work in SharePoint. And here it is. This is going to be awesome. And so after several weeks of going back and forth, 5 a.m. phone calls, multiple Link and WebEx meetings, we won it. Shocking, surprise. You probably saw that coming. And we were a smallish firm, so we took the top people. We're like, all right, handpicked. Let's do this. We're going to nail this. We get on the flights. We land in London. we head off on the train to the office, and we walk into the kickoff meetings. And over the course of the next week, 2 weeks, we interviewed, people across the org, up and down, 30 some odd people in Brighton and London, 10 to 15 more people in New York. And then we did another, 5-6 days of virtual meetings with people in France, Singapore, South Africa, Australia, to understand what were they dealing with. They weren't looking for just a new SharePoint intranet site. They were looking for a new way to engage employees across the entire enterprise. And that meant, how does Ariba work? How does SharePoint work? How does everything work? And what we learned was the sad reality that the tools and systems and applications that they were working with were at best 10 years old. And this was 5 years ago. One of the instances and one of the things we learned is that in some cases it took people's computers 10 to 15 minutes to start up in the morning because they had to decrypt the hard drive. You had to log in, you had to decrypt the hard drive, and then it had to go do this other thing. And there was this woman, and we sat down and she said, okay, we want you to walk us through the entire day, your day. Just tell me everything. She's like, well, I come in, I plug this in, I lock it in, I do this, and then I go get tea. And she did all this stuff, and we're like, really? Like tea? She's like, yeah, come on. And so we walk up to the cafeteria 3 floors away, we get tea, we come back, and it was still decrypting her hard drive. I was like, this is crazy. We did, just as a side, we did a quick analysis of what, later on in the week we learned that if they moved to a solid state drive, they could knock that down to 4.5 minutes. And a solid state drive is $150 when purchased through Ariba. So we did a little math and told them that they should just do solid state drives for everyone. So what we soon realized was, that the 10-year vision for American Express was in essence exactly how we were working right then and there. That the tools and systems that we were using today, IM and web conferencing and always on storage and backups and all this stuff, we're like 7 years down the roadmap for them from a technical standpoint. And the reality was setting in that we had to figure out how to help them get there. And for me, that was a fairly humbling moment because I saw the reality of what this was. That up until then I had worked in a couple of large companies. I had consulted for many enterprises, but this was just like a whole new cake. Like this was enterprise at a whole new level, and that was, to me, eye-opening and pretty, in a way, like once I kind of got past this stage, in a way pretty exciting because it was like we can really influence some change here. We can do this, and this can be exciting. So as a quick run through of maybe how we approach this problem before I dive into some other details, and this is where I started to really see some of what Peter was talking about a little bit earlier about kind of this product management side of UX and what we're doing and how real that is. So we started off with trying to understand and defining some terms for the entire team, and that was us and them. That when we look at this problem, there were cultural and technical hurdles to the problem, and we couldn't solve for one without the other, and that was really critical. We went through and defined the different areas of this to say this is what the current state is of both the cultural and technical standpoints, and here's what a midpoint would be, and here's what a utopia vision would be. And that midpoint was kind of in that 3 to 5 year range, and the utopia was 4 to 10. And we expected there would be some overlap. We created hassle maps that documented the current state experience and then took some guesses, some hedges, of what a midpoint and a future state would be and how we could reduce that process for the 10 different pillars of the application organization. As we progressed, we added more detail around this, including specific paths to change from that current to midpoint and midpoint to utopia. We all know what these are. We are UX designers. The executive team, they didn't need a 100-page presentation or report about this. So we created a high-fidelity story map that brought together all of those personas and pillars into a cohesive story that said, this is the future of workplace. I think, originally we wanted to do a video vignette, but time just didn't work out. And then somewhere really far down the end, we finally created some screens that said, this is what it could look like. But this was by no means at the early onset. And I think this is this process of, how do we facilitate this conversation? And then finally, this is the 10-year roadmap. And the items in yellow are the midpoint, and the items in green are the utopia vision. This is the whole process. Top is cultural changes, bottom is technical changes, and how you can move along this continuum to get down to those end goals. And what you can see is that some of these things play together. Oh, sorry, the resolution's not very good. But items on the cultural side influenced how the technical side. You had to have these in a certain order so that it all matched up. Now, as I said, this was 5 years ago, so I hope dearly that they're at this point. The last time I talked to them was a couple years ago, and they had definitely been building off of momentum, and I wouldn't be surprised if they were actually closer to the end, if not past at this point. So I guess as I start to dive into this, I think that simplification is the first and foremost way to attack some of these problems. And when we look at enterprise versus consumer problems, things that are working in the enterprise are really just an issue of scale, at least from my perspective, that they get so big and so complex that we have a hard time knowing where to start. And that's the challenge, is like, where do you start and how do you start? So who here works at Microsoft or has worked at Microsoft? Did you get asked this question? No, right? It's the how would you move Mount Fuji, right? So there's a whole book written on it, right, from the title. The interview questions from the 90s and early 2000s of, how would you move Mount Fuji? And they always wanted to ask these questions. There are some other ones, like if you had 5 pool balls on a table and you hit this one, how would you do this? It's just like, oh, you guys are crazy. And if you look up on the internet, how would you move Mount Fuji? There's tons of snarky answers. Like, well, why? Why would you want to move Mount Fuji? What's your goal? And that's the easy way to kind of sidestep around a problem, right? So you're the business owner, the CEO, the board of directors, the company comes and says, hey, we want to go this direction. It's like, well, why? That's big and scary. Like, why would you want to go do that? Let's take something easier. Let's not solve that. But let's go ahead and just assume, for the purpose of this conversation, that we've decided that we want to move Mount Fuji, to save all of humanity. I don't know. The main plausible answer for this kind of maps back to this Tower of Hanoi problem, where if you reduce the mountain into parts and then move those parts in a certain order, you can move the mountain. The concept of moving a mountain is ginormous and scary and hard. But the idea of moving a bucket of dirt is like, oh, I can do that. Can you do it 1,000,000 times? Yeah, probably. So the challenge is, how do we take the same problem-solving process to these things that we run into in the enterprise? So a problem I ran into several years ago, I've taken the company out of it, but they were running into a retention problem. This isn't a design problem, this is a business problem, right? They saw a significant decrease in employee retention for a 3rd consecutive year. And when I say significant, it was like 40%. It was huge. And so they said, okay, well, shit, why? Why are these people leaving? And they found that most of them were fresh graduates out of school. I said, okay. And why? Sorry, that one's a little blurry. And in school, they'd been using social networks to aid in the research and the problem solving and information gathering. for any given project, and those were in person and online conversations. Why? The internal tools that the company provided were antiquated and difficult to use, and that was if they could even find them. Why? Well, additionally, IT was blocking all of the external social networks. So the company had hired top graduates with advanced degrees in business, finance, and economics. They were a financial institute in New York. And they were losing many of them before the end of the first year. And these new employees came in, they were expecting to solve cool and exciting problems, but were handcuffed with these antiquated tools and the inability to reach out and use the tools that they were used to using. How about that? These students were leveraging and had leveraged all of their in-person and online networks, and they were unable to do so now. And so now we've kind of crafted what is this problem and helped kind of drill into what it could be, but we have to, now what do we do? This concept of asking the 5 whys is not a thing new. This comes out of the Toyota management philosophy, and Yvon Chouinard mentioned it in his book, Let My People Go Surfing. And in that book, he talks about the process of going through this problem-solving exercise and how it's critical for the company to do that themselves. Now, this is where I said earlier that I come from a consulting standpoint, and I actually believe that to be 1,000% true. That I should back up for a sec, and is why I like to be transparent in my projects. That I want to bring the whole project team, that means me and the company that I'm working for, walk them through this process of how do we solve these problems, to the tune that if a year later they tell me that they went and solved 3 more problems without my help, that's great. Like that's awesome. I don't need to keep doing that. And so I do think it's important that we do handle this in a certain way. So going back to the problem now, if we have this hypothesis on what to do, by running a quick brainstorm session, you can map out where to put potential solutions. So a couple of these could have been, that you could improve internal collaboration tools. Go build something and make it awesome. But that's a lot of work and brings with it a lot of risk. You could just tell them to use their mobile devices and not connect to the firewall in their network. Like, that works. There's some security with it. There's some other concerns there, but you're like, get it done. You could just open the firewall for everyone. Or you could conduct a little pilot, run a test, see how it worked. And that's exactly what they ended up doing. They ran a quick pilot with the next set of new hires, and they allowed them limited access to social networks and other tools outside of the firewall. And they used that to evaluate what they were using and how it was working while they worked on how to implement something at a larger scale. So that's what they did. So moving on to the next topic, empathy. What would a UX talk be without an empathy slide? But I'm going to talk about it in what I think is a slightly different way. Sure, the first concept in user experience design is the user. So yes, we always think about the user. What are their problems? How are they going to be using it? What are they running into? Unique to enterprise tools is those are employees, and in many cases, our fellow coworkers. And these are people that we run into in the hall or in the lunchroom or are friends of ours. And so we have to look at that in a slightly different way than just kind of this other people that we may not actually interact with. However, and this is a little bit of the consulting in me too, I think we need to have empathy for the other people on the project. And this means people that are on the business side. So this could be the product managers, this could be the business owners, it could be the executive team, the board of directors, it could be anyone in that realm. And I think we need to understand who they are and what they're bringing to the table, and maybe some of the issues that they're dealing with that are outside of this project. Is this a pivot point in their career? Is there bonus attached to the launching of this product? These are all things that we need to be aware of as we're looking at this project, because it may influence their decisions. And these are decisions that may not make sense to what we want to do for a user. And they could be at direct conflict to what we want to do to the user. And if we don't understand, maybe how they're trying to come at it, or have some empathy to their situation, then we might be too willing to just ignore it. As an aside, just yesterday I sat in a sales conversation, and a gentleman was telling us about a new CTO at a large company, and he was getting bombarded. Just bombarded. He's been there like a month, and he's getting requests and fires and drills, and everything is just coming at him in so many different directions. And promises were being made. The product was being designed while he was in the midst of that. And so they were coming and saying, how would you help us? And it's like, well, we have to acknowledge that this is happening, that this new individual is just getting beat. And those are fires that we have to help put out. And they may be in contrast to how we would otherwise attack the problem. But that's okay, because if we don't solve for that, then we're not going anywhere. And that's, I guess, that's just part of the problem. That's part of the dynamic of working within this space, that we have to acknowledge that is true, and then let's do our best to solve that, or at least, solve it enough that people can calm down before we dive into the other meatier stuff. In the same vein, this is true from a technology standpoint, right? So if we look at, everyone that we have to work with, the business, the users, the technology, this isn't just, we could say, oh, well, we have to understand the technology stack or the tools or the processes that are going to be used, but we also have to understand who is the technology team and what are they doing? What are they working on? What's the priority of this project to the other 3 projects? And how does this all come together? In another project, we're working, company A is working with Microsoft to get a huge product out to market. And this is a product that several other companies have tried to attack over the years, but just haven't been able to take on the whole end-to-end process. And they said, nope, we can do this. But we got to do it with Microsoft because they can help us. They've got a ton of tools and applications and processes that they've already created that we can leverage to get this out the door. And although that is true, and we want to get something out, this year or early next, it means that we have to make some design decisions that maybe aren't optimal for the users in order to meet that deadline, that goal, and the objective of using these systems to move that forward faster. Again, just kind of is, and we have to be aware of that and kind of make that the best we can. So this is what I refer to as the trifecta. That these same roles are found really in any project, startup or enterprise. And as I said earlier, the issue here is at scale. So in a recent project, we had 8 different types of users. Gosh, that's a little bit more than 8. Oh man, my emojis went crazy. That's all right. So we had 8 different types of users accessing this new loan origination process. We had one business owner. It added all these other ones, like that snake, like a snake in the scales of justice. Cool. had had a single business owner for the platform, but underneath them, but not really underneath them, there were 6 other business owners for distinct areas of the application. They weren't in a reporting hierarchy. They were all even, but they owned these one things that all had to plug in together. And then we had 6 different development teams, each with 4 to 8 to 10 developers working on any given platform or project. And this doesn't even start to count, the board of directors, the steering committee, the executive team, etc. And then in addition, there's the UX team, situated in the middle. And when I look at this, I kind of say that it's our duty as designers to take all of this into consideration. So similar to Peter's trifecta diagram earlier, I've kind of relooked at that. So rather than these roles, I think that there's these other roles that we have to be aware of, and design is kind of in the middle. And in a way, we're kind of like these therapists for the organization, in that we're listening and hearing and understanding where each of these problems are, and trying to take all of that and munch that together. But what I want to be really careful of is that we are still equally represented and important in this conversation. That we come with expertise and experience that is on par with everything else that's being said and done. And so that's not to say that we are in the middle smaller, but I can't really draw it that we're in the middle and the same size. So finally, this brings us to the concept of design, and what is design, and how is design in this situation done. And design is a loaded term, especially in larger organizations, especially in older organizations. And that doesn't necessarily match up to how I define design and have really talked about design here. And in the past month, I had a really interesting conversation with one of my clients, and she's dealing with this same situation and issue where she is the head of design within this organization, and yet as she goes in to try and solve some of these problems, the organization is kind of pushing her back out. That they really only view her and her team as the ones that create the posters and the flyers around campus. That although that she brings in others to solve these problems, they haven't given her that authority for that team yet. And so the challenge is, how do we turn that conversation? And so what I'd like to, and I'm getting told that I need to finish up really quick here. What I'd like to talk about is that design is, that we need to separate out this concept of I am a designer versus I am a facilitator of the design process. And by getting into this other side of it, where I'm yes, an advocate for design within the organization, but that I am a facilitator of these activities, of this process of problem solving that ultimately gets to a design or a solution. And facilitation, these are just a couple of quick examples of, facilitation is, doing storyboards and journey maps on whiteboards together. This was hours of working through this conversation here to kind of remove things and move them around on the screen. And this was, this is what is today, and then this is part of what will be tomorrow. And how do we work through this process? Facilitating design means standing and working with the chairman of the board, who is the gentleman on the right, to say, here are the problems that people are running into, and then to brainstorm ideas with them. They have a different insight. They have some ideas. It's listening to the stakeholders, the end users, the internal people in a process, to then come back and say, here's what I've heard to all of you, and here's what I think you should do. Here is what you should do. And in this situation, this is the COO of a multi-billion-dollar company that is for the first time seeing the end-to-end journey for internal and external resources through the sales process. And at the end of this meeting, he looked at this and he's like, we're doing this all wrong. We have a $1.2 million budget for website maintenance, and I want to move all of that to creating a tool to better facilitate the sales process. And these are the types of problems that we can help facilitate through the design process once we kind of take off or move to side our designer hat. So I guess I'm going to skip that one because I've got like a minute. So lastly, what I want to finish on is that really what we need to do as designers inside of the enterprise is do our best to challenge and confront the status quo. And that is best done by asking why. Not just once, not just twice, but as many times as we need to boil it down to the final question. So that's it, and I apologize that I ran right up.